So for more on this story, we are joined in studio by ANC NEC member Mefibi Potgieter Qubule, and of course we also are joined by international relations analyst Mr. Thembisa Fakude, who will be part of the discussion just a little bit later on. But let's bring it here into the studio for a few moments and just reflect on just how quickly things are happening in the US. I wonder if within the ANC we were expecting to see, such a result coming from the Foreign Affairs Committee in the US. 34 votes for sanctions against ANC and government officials, against 16 that are against this. That's an overwhelming number.
Yeah, no, I think it certainly is a majority, but I think we also must understand that the Republicans control Congress, so that was expected in the sense if the matter went to the vote. The question about the speed at which it's happened, it's also in a sense not surprising, because the current US administration on a lot of things have been very decisive in order to move things forward in terms of their agenda. So I think that we're used to that things tend to take long in government, but I think that this is certainly a feature of the current US administration, that they seem to be, pushing things very fast in a very fundamental way, not just for ourselves, but for the rest of the world.
Yeah, I do want to focus on the ANC perspective, and you're right, not so fast. We started hearing these murmurings around March already this year of possible sanctions against
That's correct.
Officials.
It was introduced in March, April.
Yeah, but when we start to then look at the implications inside the ANC, much of the discussions that we've had on US-SA relations has been state to state, right? But when we start seeing the focus particularly on the African National Congress and its officials, I wonder what the conversations sound like within the ANC, seemingly pressure for the ANC to start changing its foreign relations policies.
Well, I think that's the objectives for South Africa, not just for the ANC, for South Africa, because there's certain principles of our foreign policy that's in our constitution. So it's an attempt to pressurize South Africa to change its foreign policy, and of course the ANC is a majority party within the Government of National Unity, and therefore that particular focus. But I also think that we have to also take in consideration that the bill talks about ANC leaders as well as government officials. And there was an interesting point made yesterday by, I think, Professor Oscar van Heerden, commenting on this issue, is that, it's the beginning, because you disagree with a political party or government officials that doesn't support your position, and there's a journalist that write against the things that you raise as reasons for why you're targeting government officials and the ANC for sanctions, and it's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
So I think that certainly we're concerned about it, because this kind of coercion to try and change policy of a sovereign country is certainly quite a problematic issue. But I also think that at the same time, this question about, you're putting people on a list and their names, it was only on the 1st of July 2008 that Nelson Mandela got off the US terrorist list. 1st of July 2008, he retired as president. It was on the eve of his 90th birthday. So I think that there is a track record of this. But even then, during that period when many leaders of the ANC, South Africans, were on that list of terrorists and communists and all the words that we hear today, there's always been a process of engagement with the government, with Congress people, with civil society, with business, and I think that we have to continue to do that in the US.
Is that to say that if this bill does pass through Congress, and then you do in fact see it succeed, despite the numbers and what they might look like, where Democrats are concerned, perhaps coming to the aid of South Africa, that if this list does in fact pass through and officials in South Africa are sanctioned in the US, that would be, in your view, a superficial sort of passing? And I guess that also speaks to whether or not the ANC could have been a bit more proactive. I'm adding a second question on top if you'll allow me to stack things.
That's fine, yeah.
But the ANC could have been more proactive in speaking as a political party. We've seen AfriForum, for instance, as a structure traveling to Washington, D.C. Andrew Whitfield recently losing his position as deputy minister as a result of that trip to Washington. And of course, the argument is made whether or not that was, on government duty or not. That's another debate altogether. But could there have been better efforts by the party, not the state, to engage with Washington?
Well, I think that there certainly has been engagement over the last 2 years, because this issue has been around for a while in the previous administration as well. There has been an attempt to introduce a similar bill. And there's certainly been engagements by the ANC with counterparts in the US, both in government but also in civil society, and different organizations that we've worked with. The question is whether it would have made a difference, and whether it has made. I think that the reality is that the current administration has been quite clear about the kind of path that it wants to continue. If one look at the reasons for that's given in the first iteration of the bill that was introduced in April, it was top of mind is the question of Israel, and the stance that South Africa and the ANC in particular taken on the genocide in Gaza, the question about relationships with China, with Russia, etc. And some of the things sounds rather, sort of like it makes you smile in some senses. For example, one of the things in that earlier part of the bill talks about the fact that you have Huawei and listing ZTE, etc. in South Africa, and that it will impact on South African sovereignty. But we also have American companies. We've got Microsoft, we've got Google, we've got all of these American companies here. And why would it be okay for the one and not for the other in terms of impacting on our sovereignty? And this is why South Africa has always taken this position, and certainly the ANC historically, that as a country we should take a non-aligned stance, because we should be able to talk to anyone.
Yeah, as a country, we can take a non-aligned stance, but the policy of the ANC in and of itself, really, that for the most part, the heartbeat of the party, right, in how it interacts with its foreign affairs, its views on what happens in the Middle East, the ANC's view of the position of Iran, for instance, in the tensions in the Middle East. Are those compromisable for the party?
Well, those issues are matters of principle. We've said when we adopted the protocol on genocide, and we certainly supported it at the time, that never again. In 1994, as we had our election, the genocide in Rwanda happened. And this is why the African Union adopted the fact that of not just non-interference, but non-indifference. So those are matters of principles. And I don't think that as a movement we can, or even as a country, we can compromise on matters like that. I think that the other issue about ensuring that we continue to engage, that has always been our position at times when the ANC was regarded as a terrorist organization, when its president, Nelson Mandela, until 2008 was still on that terrorism list. We still engaged, we reached out, we talked. The ANC in exile established representative offices in the US at a time when the government didn't recognize the liberation movement. So I think that's consistent with that position.
When we come back, we're going to bring in Mr. Thembisa Fakude, of course, who's Director of Africa-Asia Dialogues, to give us his perspective on what this means, not just for the state, but particularly for the party, the African National Congress, how it maneuvers its own foreign affairs policies and views at a time when you've got moves taking place within the higher echelons of US states to sanction individuals at the very top of the African National Congress. So we'll get into that and open up the lines as well. Be part of the conversation, 0105 946010, or send us a WhatsApp on 072 110 5584. We're back in just a minute. Welcome back. You're still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition. We continue to look at US and South Africa relations, and not just the state, but also the African National Congress. So with, of course, some steps being seen where we've seen the US-South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act of 2025 cleared by the Foreign Affairs Committee in the US with an overwhelming majority of 34 for 16. That, of course, sponsored by Ronnie Jackson, and some strong words that he's used to describing the African National Congress. And I'm going to use some of those quotes a little bit later on, but he speaks of the country and its officials supporting communists and terrorists. Strong words. We're still in studio with ANC NEC member Phoebe Potgieter-Qubule, and of course, so we are also joined by Mr. Tembisa Fakude. Always a pleasure to have you with us, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. You've been listening to some of my chat here in the studio. I think what you make of what we've heard around just how proactive the ANC has been in defending and representing itself in Washington in this administration of Donald Trump. Do you think that there have been missteps or opportunities that the African National Congress could have used?
Well, the ANC has not been proactive in any way. In fact, it is very reactive often. And one, of course, would have expected that there is enough intelligence that would have forewarned the ANC of what was to come, at least in the beginning of the Trump's presidency. But what we've seen the ANC that's been dragging its feet. And now we find ourselves in this situation where they have to fix something that was preventable, one will argue. The second point is we have two racist organizations in the form of Solidarity and AfriForum that has gone on to undermine the government of the government of the ANC. And we're yet to see strong action against the actions of AfriForum and Solidarity. The president of the ANC, President Cyril Ramaphosa, has been, as is always the case, in fact, has earned a nickname called Ramaphosphoner because he never moves, he never acts, he takes his own time, to the irritation of most South Africans. Not only does he come late to meetings while we all wait for him and make us wait for 3 hours before he comes to a meeting, but he really never does act in time when it comes to matters of agency. And I think ANC has itself to blame in this regard. This was, as far as I'm concerned, preventable. They should have at least engaged on a charm offensive much more earlier on. Right now, as we speak, we don't have men and women who are fit for purpose to deal with Donald Trump in the United States representing South Africa. Again, I'll argue. There has been a generalization of the cabinet. As a result, you have people who can't really deal with these gangsters at the moment sitting in different parts of the world and push our foreign policy. And that's a problem. But the other point, which I think is very important, and I think the ANC needs to start reading the room. The geopolitical realities are changing. Politics of the world and the new global order require a certain type of intervention, including foreign policy. Yes, our foreign policy is very strong and very respected around the world, but it's becoming archaic and irrelevant. It was first devised by the president of the ANC, President Nelson Mandela, who correctly at the time had to implement the type of foreign policy that was chosen and preferred by the ANC. But times have changed, and now the foreign policy requires a certain type of aggression, I would argue, a certain type of assertiveness. And what we see at the moment, we don't see really, as far as I'm concerned and from where I sit, men and women who are really fit for purpose and ready for this challenge that the new global order is presenting to us.
Okay, I'm going to give you the opportunity to respond to that.
Okay,
ANC
sure.
foreign policy is archaic and outdated, the words of Mr. Tembisa Fakude. But let's take some calls. Walter is in Pretoria. Walter, good evening. Thank you so much for calling in.
Good evening, Naledi. Thank you very much for having me.
Sure.
And
Talk to us,
thank you
Walter.
very much for giving me an opportunity to make a comment.
Sure, go ahead.
Look, Naledi, South Africa must embark on its developmental agenda free from external manipulation, free from external bullying. South Africa is a sovereign country and it needs to be understood as such. The USA must respect that we have our own internal policies And South Africa equally must understand that the United States has its own policies, of which we don't interfere with. We respect their own country. We respect their own policies. We also deserve to get respected. We must be respected enough. The USA, we are partners here with the USA. South Africa is not an island. We understand that. We are part of the global community. But there must be that level, deep level of mutual respect. Our own developmental agenda must be determined by the South Africans themselves. It must not be the USA and its own citizens. It must be us as South Africans to develop our own developmental agenda.
Okay. Walter, thank you so much for calling in. We do appreciate it. Let's take a look at maybe 3 WhatsApps that have come in from our viewers as well. We'll put those up on the screen in a moment. Some of those views are Ronald saying, good evening, Naledi. The sanctions are used to silence South African stance against Israel's genocide on Palestine. Democracy and free speech will be undermined. The ANC must not be deterred. They must be more motivated to be against the genocide in Gaza. AfriForum must be taken to the Constitutional Court for being against the South African state. Okay, Ronald, thank you so much for that. Piri in Alex says, it's about time South Africa cut ties with the U.S. We can't be bullied around and dictated on policy by the U.S. administration. The U.S. is not the entirety of the world market. We will foster new relationships with other countries. Similar views that we heard from the president saying we're looking at other export opportunities and other relations outside of the U.S., but particularly on the African continent. Yes. Let's look at some of the information, though, that is being shared about South Africa and perhaps what that says about
Can I start with the
yes,
response
deal with
there?
that. Yes,
Yeah.
you want to do
Okay.
archaic foreign policy.
Okay, well, not so much there. Let me start with the question about whether it's preventable.
Sure.
The question is preventable, but at what cost? Because the only way that that bill law would not go through in the same way as the tariffs, etc., is if we withdrew the case against Israel in the International Court of Justice. Children are being starved. Doctors are complaining that they can't, treat patients because they're starving. And I think that the question that's been raised about could it have been prevented, I mean, our position is that we've engaged, we could have done obviously more, but the reality is that preventing this from coming into effect, at what cost? And it can't be at the cost of principle. So that's the first issue that I want to raise. The second issue is to do with our foreign policy. Our foreign policy has always been informed by principle, but pragmatic based on the circumstances. And as the gentlemen say, yes, circumstances change. But part of the principles, I mean, there's a couple of principles. One of them is the importance of multilateralism. So whether you live in a situation where you have colonies, or whether you live in a situation where we're moving towards a multipolar world, and there is one country that wants to drag us back into either a Cold War, where you're either for us or against us, or drag us back into a situation where, you don't want anybody else to develop besides yourself. And I think that what has happened over the last 30, 40 years is the emergence of other countries, particularly developing countries, and South Africa has played an important role in there, that came together and engaged with the global north and said that, one, we have to look at common global problems like climate change, like peace, but secondly, we need to look at how do we ensure that countries of the global south have the right to develop. Now, if that's archaic, then I think that we don't mind being called archaic. I think that the principles are important. It was important 20 years ago. I think that those principles are still important going forward, because that is what living in a global community of nations means, that you respect the right to development, as one of your callers said, but also you respect the sovereignty of each other. and accept that we live in a global community of nations where we all have to coexist.
Yeah, I want to reignite this issue because it again speaks to our relationships with a country like Iran, for instance, that seem to be also quite central to the tensions between the US and South Africa. You've got the Institute for the Study for Global Anti-Semitism and Policy that alleged in November 2024 that the ANC received some sort of funding from Iran for bringing a genocide case in the International Court of Justice against Israel. At this time, can we respond to that while the ANC is being so closely looked at by the US government? Is that true?
Well, of course not. I mean, they made this statement then. There has been requests not just from ourselves, but from others for where's the evidence. They haven't managed to produce that. But also to say that our relationship with the cause of the Palestinians go back many, many decades. And this is why the oft quote by Nelson Mandela, that freedom of South Africa is linked to the freedom of the Palestinians. When there's a genocide happening against the Palestinian people, I mean, the number of children that get killed every day, journalists, aid workers, it's unprecedented in the history of the United Nations over the last, I think since its inception, that so many UN workers have been killed in one conflict. So all of those examples, to then say that we need to be paid to do that, I think it's disingenuous. It's consistent with the position that South Africa and the ANC has taken on the conflict in Western Sahara. It's consistent with the position that we've taken on the conflict in Ukraine, to be able to say that you need to have a peaceful resolution to it. To a conflict that you can't, you can't have this zero sum, that there's going to be an absolute winner. At the end of the day, you will have to come to the table and talk in order to find a peaceful solution.
I'm going to bring back to Mr. Fakude, because I think that what perhaps we're not looking at is the separation of ANC foreign policy, how it relates to Palestine, and certainly what it does when it looks at Iran. And I don't know if that distinction is particularly necessary when you've got global institutions writing reports that the ANC received resources of some kind for the state going to the ICJ.
But this is a very pro-Israel Zionism policy institute. So I think that to make the statement that global institutes, this is a very particular institute that has a very particular position on the conflict and the right of independence and sovereignty of the Palestinian people. And that's the context in which that report and accusation was made. They were asked, have been asked by a number of institutions in the US to produce the evidence. They haven't done so. But again, the question about the Palestinian issue, as I said, has been a consistent issue that has been linked to the freedom of the South African people.
So difficult
we don't
to separate,
have to be paid to be able to take the matter forward.
Yeah, I need to bring Mr. Fakude in here, because you have been listening in quite attentively, and I wonder if that separation is necessary. South African relations with Palestine, and if there can be a relook at our relationship with Iran. I mean, you speak of this institution, and you speak about its perspective, but this is what they've talked about. They've talked about the ANC reinvigorating its relations with Iran to develop commercial, military, and nuclear arrangements. Big allegations, Mr. Fakude.
Well, obviously, the United States has been totally informed and misinformed about what's going on in South Africa in relation to its support for the Palestinian cause and its condemnation of the genocidal regime led by the warlord Benjamin Netanyahu. There's no sensible person who won't condemn what's currently happening in Gaza, the actions of Israel that continues to bombard people queuing for food. That can never be accepted. I think the discussion that we're having at the moment is about the ANC's position and proactiveness in terms of dealing with the United States. And I continue to argue that they slept on the job They should have been much more proactive. And I've made examples earlier on that we have these two very racist, ultra-right organization in the form of Solidarity and AfriForum that has not been tackled properly by the ANC. All of us who are concerned and observing from afar wish that the president of the ANC and the ANC itself could come up strongly in condemnation of these productive institutions that continue to benefit from the comforts of South Africa, yet they can go and lobby foreign countries to work against our own government. And ANC has not done much on that. One. Two is ANC hasn't got enough people fit for purpose currently in the United States or in Washington that can deal with these toughies and the right-wing Republicans who are pushing a certain policy against South Africa that's totally misinformed and ill-informed. We have one chief campaigner of anti-South African position of goodness in the United States in the form of Elon Musk. Again, it's been treated with kids' gloves. So all I'm saying is that the ANC needs to take a much more stronger position in terms of dealing with the challenges that we're currently facing in the United States. Importantly, though, I think the ANC also need to read the room. Yes, we are a government or a country that's driven by a principled foreign policy, but things are changing. The foreign policy and international relations, the geopolitical realities are not the same as they were in 1994. They require a certain type of skill set in terms of diplomacy and diplomats. And what I see at the moment, unfortunately, I don't see people fit for purpose to deal with the challenges and all these negative frontiers that are coming our way.
Unfortunately, though, I mean, just on Newzroom Afrika today, we were having the discussion around how even journalists are, losing their lives in the Middle East. And so when the ANC says their foreign policy comes from a principled point of view, perhaps we need to come up with examples. And I'll give Mr. Thembisa Fakude the opportunity to give us the alternative of what you do then when you do have this principled stance that the ANC believes it must take over a crisis that is taking place in the Middle East and also being able to satisfy trade relations with the US. How do they strike that balance? The ANC, that is. And Mefibi Potgieter-Qubule also wanting to speak to the issue of what the ANC does about Solidarity and AfriForum after this. Welcome back. We continue to look at US-SA relations on the back of the US's Foreign Affairs Committee seeing the passing of the US-South Africa Bilateral Relations Review. Of course, just one step forward for it to see clearance, but essentially what it does is look to possibly sanction government officials as well as some ANC leaders. We're getting your reactions via WhatsApp on 072-110-5584. Let's take a look at 102 of those WhatsApps as they come up on the screen. Madix in Pretoria says, good evening, everyone. There's nothing South Africa can do, especially the non-aligned stand. Economically, people of the South, in terms of development, we need global interactions, not dictated who to trade with. The best offers will be better. Madix, thank you so much. Malume says, sanctions are dangerous. Those on sanctions do not feel the heat, but the ordinary citizen will feel it more. Look at Zimbabwe, people will migrate feeling the wrath. Be careful around this sanction thing. Malume, thank you so much. So a lot to talk about. I mean, I was quoting issues from a study that you, and again, the study is called the study for global anti-Semitism, and you spoke about its perspective and its position on the tensions in the Middle East. But Thembisa Fakude speaks about how we can talk about sanctions possibly on individuals in the US, but what has the ANC done about Solidarity and AfriForum here at home?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the ANC has made its position clear, that we think that it is unpatriotic, that it's undermining the sovereignty of South Africa, but we are a democracy. And even if we disagree with you, you have the right, and we must defend your right to be able to organize, to mobilize, to propagate your views. So that's the first issue in terms of we've got freedom of speech as a country, and that's part of our constitutional principles. Now, one of the issues that's been raised about whether they shouldn't be taken to the Constitutional Court, and that's certainly an option, because at the end of the day, The apex body is the one that will say that whether this is treason or not. But I think that at the same time, part of what this issue signifies is that the discussion in South Africa about what constitutes our sovereignty, how do we engage with the world, but also the right of South Africa to trade with whoever it wants to. To have a country say that you can't trade with X, Y, and Z, and then expect that they must have, open access to South African markets, is a difficult balance that we need to look at. And yes, indeed, the gentleman made the point that the global situation has changed, and the global situation changed, rapidly over decades and over time. And our foreign policy has to, in terms of how we engage in it, the kind of things that we do have to adapt to that. But the reality is that there are certain principles that we stand for as a country and certain principles that we stand for as a movement that's not going to change, because of the kind of threats. The words that's been used, the communists and the terrorists, those are words that were used against us when we were fighting against apartheid. And as I said, Nelson Mandela was only taken off the terrorism list in 2008, 1st of July. So I think that indeed we're going into a difficult period. We are in a difficult global situation. We are being charged with 30%. Other countries are much higher. There are discussions amongst different countries of the South within the G77 around how do we make sure that multilateralism is defended, the right of development of the global South, the sovereignty of countries, but also multilateral institutions like the UN. That those institutions are not undermined. Yes, there are problems with those institutions, but at the same time, multilateralism as a principle that when there are global problems that we need to work together to solve it is something that we need to remain committed to as a country, and certainly we remain committed to that as a movement. The relationship with the US is something that's going to be difficult, but at the same time we need to keep engaging as we've done over many decades. Yeah. And we will continue to do so. We have 600 US companies in South Africa.
Just lastly, Mr. Fakude, before I let you go, the alternative of, the narrative then for the African National Congress as it holds on to its principles, easy to, I suppose, criticize the perspective of the party. What does the ANC at a time like this need to do immediately?
Well, the ANC is tone deaf, unfortunately, and the ANC is failing to read the room. The ANC has been very flexible in the past, by the way. If you remember, the ANC encouraged and has held talks in what was called the Spear Initiatives, where it invited both the Israelis and the Palestinians to try and find a solution. And it soon realized that it was hitting a brick wall, and now it took a position of taking this genocidal regime to the ICJ. So the reconciliation that was left and inherited from Nelson Mandela was thrown out, correctly so, because the regime of Benjamin Netanyahu, Itamar Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and Itamar Ben-Gvir in Israel did not work. Now we're in a situation where I do believe that the ANC can again be flexible in terms of its foreign policy. It can again read the room and adjust to the new realities of the world. You can't continue with this principled, meek foreign policy that continues to embarrass all of us. By the way, this is our foreign policy, which is initiated by the ANC, but it does not necessarily, after it was accepted and admitted by the government, it becomes my foreign policy. And I think I've got the right to say, and many other South Africans should comment. And this is a discussion I think we should take forward in terms of revising our foreign policy, which is no longer serving the purpose, given that there are new realities around the world.
Okay, final thoughts. You do have U.S. Representative Jonathan Jackson, not Ronnie Jackson, who sponsored the bill, but now Jonathan Jackson. We're hoping to speak to him in a few moments. He did, of course, make some sort of commitment to speak to us, who in that committee sitting actually shared the perspective and said this bill does absolutely nothing to advance our bilateral relations with South Africa. In fact, threatens to undermine it, going as far as to reiterate once again that there is no white genocide in South Africa. So that perhaps some hope that there is a voice speaking for us, optimism?
Well, I think that of course, that's always been the case. That I think that the gentleman made the point that, you know, the use the example of the Spear Initiative, and certainly we will continue to have that engagement with parties and organizations in the US. Last year on the sideline of the World Movement, the summit that happened here in Johannesburg, we had a round table with, you know, people, Republicans as well as Democrats, on this issue of the bilateral relationship. So we'll continue to do that. But the question about South African foreign policy, I mean, South Africa is being punished exactly because it's not meek. We've been punished because when the rest of the world kept quiet about the Palestinian genocide that was happening, we took the stance. Now we're joined by other countries, in this case at the ICJ. But in addition to that, also the question about the right to development, the right to chart your own development path.
Yeah.
And I think that we've always been very strong on principle, but at the same time that we've been willing to talk about tactics, to reach out, to engage, even with people that we don't agree with, that at most and all international forums, when there's a serious global issue, we engage the US.
Yeah.
And that is not going to change.
Yeah. Well, we'll be watching closely. Still quite a way to go, but we really do appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us. Phoebe Potgieter-Qubule there speaking to us in studio, and via video link, Mr. Thembisa Fakude, who is the Director for Africa-Asia Dialogues. We take a short break. More news on the other side.